The King of Podcasts Radio Network proudly presents the Broadcasters Podcast, where we dive deep into the media industry headlines and dissect the digital disruption that diverges the masses into the new media counterculture and away from the media establishment. Here is the King of Podcasts.
Here we go, episode 181 of the Broadcasters Podcast, with yours truly, King of Podcasts, back with a voice that sounds and resembles me. So last week I was going to take a vacation. Didn't happen. And so what happened instead was I already had a best of episode already put together that I had done 2 weeks ago after the last episode that I recorded. So I went in and put it together, and I thought I was going to take a vacation, but then I got hit with a cold that became bronchitis, which is what I'm still with right now, on the way out of it. But, you know, had my plan B all set up, except it was for sickness, not for vacation. So I didn't take vacation. I guess I'll have to figure that out later in the year. Maybe later this summer, I don't know. I'll figure that out. But nevertheless, it gave me some time because now we have a new subject that we can kind of delve into on the program that really has stood out. And it was something I really wanted to bring up prior as early as last week if I were going to be here, or I would have brought up in one of my podcasting series, but I'm going to do it here now. Rock music. Is it about that time for rock music to make a resurgence, to resurrect itself as one of the preeminent forms of music around the world? And for the most unlikely of places, pop music might be the place where it's coming from. There are 3 artists right now with some significant pull, mainstream pull around the world that are starting to get the attention, and it's starting to get some people talking about the fact that we might start seeing more rock music out there. Now, there's always been a little bit of that here and there. You have some artists that are definitely converting themselves towards the end of working on music that's more alternative or more of an end of like that. So a Billie Eilish or a Lorde or I mean, some of those artists like that, even like a Tate McRae almost to a certain point, certain extent. You have some established artists like Machine Gun Kelly, MGK, who put out a pop punk album late last year that has resonated very well, to which one of his songs, My Ex's Best Friend, is still a very prominent song in radio and streaming, to where Halsey is now collaborating on an album that's going to be released soon with the help of Trent Reznor of Nine Inch Nails fame, which is definitely going to give a different sound. And Halsey originally came from kind of an alternative set before she became pop. And now we have several artists that are definitely stood out. Among the 3, we didn't expect it was going to be from this, but Olivia Rodrigo. Listen, yeah, she is as pop as can be. She is the pop darling right now of this year, 2021. There's no doubt about it. And Driver's License was our entree into her as a solo artist, as a overnight sensation. Then the album Sour comes out, which has quite a few songs that are very pop punk oriented. And then the talk begins. Oh, it sounds good for you. Sounds a little bit like Misery Business by Paramore. And then we're starting to hear resemblances to Lorde in some cases, or into Billie Eilish in some cases. There's a lot of this where Olivia Rodrigo she had some inspirations that brought her to some of the music that she has. And there's a lot of inspiration from other artists out there in the first place. Triple X, before he passed, definitely had quite a bit of an inspiration on that end. Juice WRLD, also feeling a little bit on that end before he passed. You were starting to feel some of that right now. Ed Sheeran last year, what was the last album he put out? Also had quite a bit of a feel to that. Travis Barker, working out right now with a number of artists, putting music out. He's now featured in a song by Willow, which is the daughter of Will Smith and Jada Pinkett Smith, who did try a certain direction, an R&B, or more like a rap direction with Whip Your Head years ago. And now Transparent Soul is a song that started to chart, very viral on TikTok. It's making its way around, a definitive sound, and it sounds good. And you can definitely feel the Travis Barker feel once again. And then the other artist that has to be focused here of the three is the winner of this year's Eurovision Award, which is usually an award that is entitled to somebody that becomes a really major star around the world, because all the major European countries vote for the artist. So ABBA's won that. I mean, if I look at past Eurovision stars that have won this particular contest and have become big sensations as a result. The song competition goes back to 1956, and artists like Lulu or Brotherhood of Man or ABBA were all best known for becoming major artists as a result of this. Celine Dion, same way. So there were people that were discovered as a result of this contest. And this year, Maneskin, they won with their album Zita e Buoni. And it's an Italian group. And also there's an artist, Duncan Lawrence, with a song called Arcade that is now listing on the American charts here. So just give you the thoughts right there. But Maneskin, now they have a song called Shut Up and Behave, which is their song that made a really big point. But also the whole part of the whole group has really been big, because now they have a composition called I Want to Be Your Slave that has blown up on the charts all around Europe. Going back to June 29th, the band had 2 tracks in Spotify Global's top 200, the first for an Italian artist. First, they had the song that's been a cover from the Four Seasons called Beggin'. That's at number 6 with 6.5 million daily streams. I Want to Be Your Slave, number 8 with 3.8 million streams. And this artist actually has more than 29 million monthly Spotify listeners. And that's leading more than Foo Fighters and Arctic Monkeys. And there are some other artists that we could talk about that could get some exposure as a result of this. Arctic Monkeys is one. Tame Impala is another. You know, there's a number of artists or Wolf Alice, or you could talk about, Beyond, Bring Me the Horizon. There's a lot of artists that are out there that could get discovered and could be brought up as a result of what's going on here, to where we get a new sound, a new era of rock, which we've missed in the last 3 decades. I mean, really in the last 2 decades, rather, because we did get some of that in the 2000s. The 2010s, not so much, because by the 2010s, what was really the resemblance of rock had been taken out of the mainstream and suffocated. Some people can go ahead and say it was the 30th anniversary of Woodstock that really was the downfall. It could be just where, the radio stations were changing because the alternative sound was going into a different direction. Just the transformation of people not really wanting to do their music through digital ends and not do it through, want to go ahead and not use actual instruments anymore. Whatever that might have changed, but this is all something that came about. I want to take a story from this past March from 5 Cent Sound that I think did a pretty good job of explaining what's going on with rock and roll, the resurgence. And this is Juliana Morgan that wrote this back in March 13th. So she mentions that it's been 30 long years since rock and roll music left the music industry spotlight. We've been mixed to a mostly mixed bag of coming from the genres of hip-hop, EDM, indie, and pop. And all the while, rock music, much less classic rock, has been left to survive in the shadows of the underground, kept alive only by die-hard fans of the genre. Chances are, if you're reading this or you're one of these fans, maybe you have hope for rock to reclaim its throne, maybe you don't. But surely you've seen the many, many articles circulating in music journalism about how rock is officially dead and not coming back. For a time, it certainly seemed that way, but to paraphrase a Scorpion song, the wind of change is here and we're all to be swept away. So this is 4 months ago. And you can tell that in some of the music we're getting out there, some of the songs that get viral on TikTok, very rock oriented. A lot of the stories that are coming out through streaming are definitely getting people's interest. So to look at the epic legacy of rock, which the younger fans or the younger consumers, those that are Gen Z or even younger than that, they're starting to adapt a little bit. I mean, they're starting to go and see look at how cool some of the artists were, the music that was coming from it, and they're adapting to it. Sometimes if I talk about where you see rock artists or you see rock artists that might have their shirts out there from somebody who's young, I was like, do you know what their songs are? And you ask yourself that. Now, when you look at movies that have been biopics that have really brought out the best of some of these big stars, Bohemian Rhapsody and Queen, Rocket Man Elton John, Lord of Chaos, The Dirt, which was the Netflix film about Motley Crue. The success of these movies, there are rumors that more biopics are to come. One's about Motorhead, Bob Dylan, and Heart. And you might even get one about Guns N' Roses. Whew, that'd be a fun one. Whatever bands end up having biopics made, each new film is not only a success for that band themselves, but also for the genre of rock itself. Biopics reach a wide array of audiences, catering both to people who already know and love the bands they're about, and to people who are simply watching movies, spiking interest in rock bands through nostalgia as well as through exposing new audiences to rock and roll. So there is the story behind that. And this is where we don't have to worry about certain rock artists coming back, going back on tour, the nostalgia, the legacy of those artists coming back and performing again, especially when they're all going to be coming back and going back to tour, especially 2021. Or, you know, Motley Crue is getting back together to tour. You're going to have a lot of bands that are going to be out touring once again. My Chemical Romance, the Doobie Brothers, Rage Against the Machine, Kiss, Ozzy Osbourne, Lynyrd Skynyrd, Bon Jovi, Def Leppard, Bob Seger, Deep Purple, The Who, Tool. I mean, there's all these other artists are coming back. Now, what I think Juliana does hit on the head is when she says this. To continue on this wonderful, thrilling path of revival, rock and roll has vitally one important task it must accomplish, gaining back the younger generation. It's no secret that youth culture controls the trends in the music industry. It's also no secret that rock and roll fell out of style with young people a long time ago. To fix this glaring issue, the answer lies in giving young people a personal connection to it. There isn't to say there aren't young people that don't already have a deep, personal, and important connection to rock music. There's not enough of them. For rock to come back, to truly come back, we needed to somehow regain a focus in the mainstream media and public eye. And we're going to talk about how this is happening now. To make that a possibility, we need something more than the growing interest of the stories of classic rock bands and their reunions. This is all great stuff, don't get me wrong, but it's not enough. What we need now is to make the genre of rock relevant to the here and now. What we need is new music. And I'm going to stop right there. The rest of the story is up. You can go look for the broadcasterspodcast.com in the description of the show. All the stories I talk about are right there. And then she goes into some of the artists that are out there that are influenced by classic rock roots that are mainstays right now in rock music, but you might not have heard a lot of them. Dirty Honey, Joyous Roof, Greta Van Fleet. You might not know they do have Instagram followings and YouTube subscribers in the hundreds of thousands. There is that. But now, who is out there carrying the flag for rock and roll? You might not like the fact that this is who we have to work with us now to help reestablish rock music into the mainstream. You might not like to hear this. But as we always have to do, to see where music is going to change and things are going to evolve in America, all we have to do is look over across the pond to our friends in the UK. Where London still matters. This is not because the artists are coming from London. There are quite a few rock artists that are out there in London that are doing very well. So don't take that away. And a number of artists continue to go ahead and sell well with what they're doing in terms of selling albums. But most rock artists are not worried about selling albums. They're more worried about putting out albums instead of worrying about singles. And that's their business. If you look right now, there's a number of artists that are in the rock realm that are making their way back. Noel Gallagher, since Oasis has gone away, he's had his group, Noel Gallagher's High Flying Machines, in the official charts album chart. Wolf Alice is out there with Blue Weekend. And you have other artists that will make their way up, like, say, Royal Blood, or the Killers making their way back up, or Arctic Monkeys, or maybe Paul Weller, formerly of the Jam and other groups, Style Council. They might make their way back up. And those things happen. And then if you look at the album charts right now, you see lots of artists of the past that are still selling so much right now as we speak. But for those rock fans out there, you got to have something that crosses over. Now, are these the artists you want? No. But what you do want to do is you want to jump on the bandwagon and follow the wave that Olivia Rodrigo, Willow, and Maneskin are creating. The crest they're creating to cross rock music over the top. And then it will let all these fans explore other artists, because they're not going to want to just hear these artists. They can hear like-minded music. Here's something like-minded on your playlist. Spotify could take advantage of this. And why not? If it allows us to get attached to new artists that are really of a different ilk, why not? I mean, it's not as if, I think we're not getting manufactured pop to a point where, oh, this sucks. No, I think there's a little bit of indie kind of credibility. There's a little bit of something to this. But what needs to be understood is that we need to go and let this music flourish. Let the mainstream music take in, and then the mainstream is opened up. The portal's opened up just for a while, long enough for their artists to come in and be noticed. Not the older artists, the ones that already have the charts, or they already have the music, the catalogs, the publishing, all this other stuff that can be the touring. We don't want people to go live back in the past. As like Jillian had said, new music has to be the catalyst to bring rock music back. And what always used to happen was, during the change of a decade, music would change. From the rock and roll music of the mid-50s to the late 50s, to the change of the British invasion, which changed rock ultimately. Then we got to the singer-songwriter, the folk music. And then we got into the album rock and the progressive sound in the 70s. Then it switches to metal, which got into more of a mainstream glam metal and changed things up. And then we get ourselves more into metal, and then more into grunge and our alternative sound. And then the hair being cut off, getting dirtier, grungier, harder. And then kind of staying like that. But then getting a fadeaway, where into the 2000s, things started looking bleak for rock. And it's never been the same since. I mean, it doesn't need to be where rock needs to be encompassing over again. But I think rock needs to be part of our music culture. The mainstream culture needs to have rock again. We need that rock culture again. And I've said this before, when it comes to politics, when it comes to, kids that are going through rage and they're angry or they're sad and they're feeling all these different emotions, music like rock really does channel better than it does hip hop, better than it does EDM, better than it does anything else. Rock music, that pure raw energy. I talked about this with Lyra Salt many years ago here on the program, and we talked about how rock really made a difference right there. And I would tell you, go back to that episode and listen to what I talked to her about, because I think we really hit a point, because we spent a good while, the first part of the interview, I remember talking about that. And look where we got. Look at how far we've gotten. And I think people need to go ahead and look at what's happening here. That there's a chance. I'm not going to say this is going to be a successful opportunity, but I think this opens the door to the 2020s being a decade where rock comes back. And it'll be a great thing for that to happen. I really believe that. Now, will I be into everything about it? No, but I think it's a good thing. Now, one of the websites actually talks about it. Loudwire actually brings it up. They put a story out there. Philip Trapp, he talks about Olivia Rodrigo, Willows, and others lead rock resurgence on the UK singles chart. Young pop artists such as teen star Olivia Rodrigo, Italian band Maneskin, and Hollywood progeny Willow are bringing rock music back to the UK's official singles chart. And remember, Scott Mills on the BBC's official chart show last Friday is Rock Back, because there was quite a bit coming back on. So on the chart in the top 40, we talked about Olivia Rodrigo's "Good for You," which is a song still hits up really good to me. I really enjoy it. Maneskin's "I Want to Be Your Slave," Willow's Travis Barker assisted "Transparent Soul," all three anchored by rock elements such as electric guitar and live drums. They all hit the top 40. And so for the period ending June 24th, this past week, where the new chart will be coming in this week, it will show that Olivia Rodrigo's song was number 1, Maneskin's song was number 7, Willow number 33. And it looks like all those songs are going to stay in the top 40 for this week as well. Rodrigo's poppy punky jam is the chart's longest reigning rock-influenced chart-topping single. Since the 2003 UK chart domination of Evanescence's Bring Me to Life, 2003. What a great song. Accordingly, the official charts company appears to recognize and appreciates the genre's comeback. Martin Talbot, the CEO of the official charts company, says, quote, "It has long been anticipated that rock would one day return to the official singles chart. Both few would have expected it from an ex-Disney Channel actress and a Eurovision-winning act, but that's what appears to be happening. The artists, to be sure, aren't representative of this type of rock music that's evolved into hard rock and heavy metal, but Rodrigo and company are undoubtedly carrying rock's sonics to new generation of listeners, whether the old school fans are aware of it or not. The current phenomenon only applies to the singles chart. The albums chart continues to showcase the best that rock has to offer, but it's rare for those album acts to find success on the singles chart. The likes of Bring Me the Horizon, Youngblood, and Machine Gun Kelly have enjoyed several stints in the top 100 over recent months and years. But it's a significant moment to see 3 guitar-driven songs in the top 40 in 2021, of which were in the top 10. And there were some songs that made their way up. Paradise E from Bring Me the Horizon was a fantastic song that came up on the chart and I thought was really, really good. Patience, KSI featuring Youngblood. What a fucking great song that was. And it definitely had a little bit of a feel to it, but it was a number 2 song in the UK. And it held up pretty well. And Polo G was actually featured on the track as well. Had a real feel to it. Now let's move along. Since the year 2000, the UK singles chart has had 29 number 1 hits that it labels pop, punk, or rock. Those include My Chemical Romance's Welcome to the Black Parade in 2006, Limp Bizkit's Rollin' in 2001, and a 2009 re-release of Rage Against the Machine's Killing in the Name Of, along with singles by the likes of Manic Street Preachers, McFly, and Oasis. In the U.S., a pop-punk comeback has started a similar trajectory, but it often seems like mainstream U.S. listeners continue to lean towards hip-hop and pop as rock gains new ground overseas. And so pop-punk is relevant again. And here's more from Loudwire, another story they talk about how pop-punk, as inevitable comeback, how the hell did it even survive? This is back in April. And that pop-punk has made its way back. The viral trends on TikTok, while artists such as MGK and All Time Low stormed the mainstream front with it. It's now back and forth with artists such as Action Adventure and Pink Shift and commanding a dynamic change. And a nostalgic revival wave on TikTok, sweeping older fans and touching base with a new wave of teenagers who are discovering pop-punk titans such as All Time Low, Paramore, and Simple Plan for the first time and turning them to viral legends. Though lurking in the shadows of pop-punk's height was a real nasty vermin, they talk about it was toxic masculinity that had put everything into a chokehold with that music. But now we're starting to see that pop-punk now is very accepting in the 2020s. So now, instead of getting the days of white dudes and snapbacks wanting about their bitch of an ex-girlfriend, we now have Meet Me at the Altar championing young women in their track Hit Like a Girl. Or No Offenses, No Nonsense takes on LGBTQ plus issues, often overlooked in marginalized groups, feeling less seen and valid. And we started seeing that in the 2000s with, artists like Hayley Williams of Paramore and Avril Lavigne, shining examples of the uphill battle against rampant sexism in this industry back in the 2000s. Pop-punk climbed its way through the 90s to explode in the 2000s, with 2020 artists aspiring and somewhat reaching the same success as their 2000 idols, the aughts. The commercial success it gained in the aughts was unfathomable, climbing the charts, being the face of MTV, landing songs on TV shows, films, and games, but it exploded so rapidly that with a wealth of talents, it also took a nosedive quicker than its argument over how Blink-182 is actually pronounced. By 2010, the artists living in the shadows of the previous decade were faced with a cut-growth gatekeeper mentality that would penalize them for creative risks. A cooling-off period was necessary before its return years later, with few bands surviving the radio silence within the community, and bands like All Time Low have been etching their path to the mainstream, while smarter artists who haven't canceled themselves or broken up to try to follow the same path. So hopefully, this artist and this writer says that pop punk will learn to adapt around and indulge itself too heavily, instead of indulging itself too heavily in its own styles. With the help of Travis Barker fielding new artists into the sound, big names like All Time Low, Paramore, Blink-182, and Avril Lavigne, working with names outside of the scene, and new talents such as Meet Me at the Altar and Pink Shift, approaching the front line, are charging for change in pop punk, and the future of the genre looks bright. So there is that. It's there. It's noticeable, and people need to keep an eye on this, where things go. Kerrang also brought up the same story where, because of the biggest song there is in the country, now it's not so much because in the States, you have the rigging of BTS and the song Butter hitting so high right now as we speak. Kerrang put a story out about how will the success for Good For You be good for rock music? And ultimately, what do they find out? The hottest record in the world right now is an angry pop punk banger with emo-inflected lyrics such as "Screw that" and "Screw you, you will never have to hurt the way you know I do." Good For You has broken streaming records, hit number 1 around the planet, and will go down a storm on the dance floor at your local rock club, where such any place is currently open, to scream like a damn sociopath. In each other's faces, the song is not by a band you'll find in Kerrang or a download pilot. Good For You comes from the star of High School Musicals, the series, Olivia Rodrigo. But her love for rock apparently is absolutely genuine. Her co-writer is Daniel Nigro, formerly of indie rock act As Tall as Lions. Certainly Good For You is not alone as a guitar anthem on her brilliant debut album, Sour. Opener Brutal is a hard-hitting grunge track that recently topped U.S. Hot Rock and Alternative Songs chart. Very good song, by the way. I like that one a lot. Good For You will almost certainly be number 1 for a 4th week on the official charts. Actually, it should be now. This story came out, I don't have the actual date, but I believe this actually came out a week ago, and the song actually should be trying to get 6 weeks at the top, coming up this weekend. So what gets a Disney star into making rowdy rock music? And more importantly, can her unparalleled success inspire a new generation of fans to embrace guitar music and help your favorite band access the radio and streaming playlists that are often so off limits to heavier artists? Very important. And here's what we get. Public Study PR's head of national radio and TV, Haley Codd, says it's her job to secure airplay for a roster of top rock acts. They range from Enter Shikari to Wargasm to Nova Twins to Water Parks. Good For You, she says, quote, potentially opens the door to a people that have only ever been exposed to out-and-out pop music, and I'm all for that. And it's nice to be able to say to radio stations, if you're playing that track and it's reacting well with your audience, why wouldn't you play Wargasm? They're slightly heavier, but they still got a big pop chorus. Outside of the specialist rock stations, few guitar records cross over to heavy rotation in the way that Good For You has, with a hit playlist at a pop network such as Capitol. And while BBC Radio 1 always supports rock artists, including Frank Carter and the Rattlesnakes and Architects on their current playlist, the current head of music, Chris Price, says that Good For You could make others pay attention to rock. Quote, it was a bit unusual to hear this gnarly guitar pop song, but more to the point, it was unusual that it was so successful so quickly. It probably sounds a lot stranger on commercial pop radio. It does stick out in the mix of everything else they play, but young people don't necessarily care about genres, and that is as true of artists as it is of fans. If radio's tough for rock, however, streaming is even harder, especially for new artists. Though there are still numerous success stories in the albums chart, the official charts company data show that the growth of rock streaming lagged well behind that of other genres, and it remains very rare for rock tracks to be added to major playlists such as Spotify's Hot Hits UK or Apple Music's Today's Hits. Good For You features prominently on both and has smashed streaming records around the world. In the UK, it's the first song to be in history to be streamed more than 11 million times for 3 consecutive weeks. Tells you everything. So if a song that is reminiscent of Paramore's Misery Business can be embraced by a mainstream audience, shouldn't streaming services be giving the dozens of other brilliant rock songs released each week a chance? Phil Birch, he's head of digital at Raw Power Management, looks after the artists such as Don Bracco, Bullet for My Valentine, Bring Me the Horizon. He's helped Bring Me, their EP Post-Human Survival Horror, which was earlier a good album if you haven't listened to it. Featured collaborations with Youngblood, Amy Lee, and the Nova Twins. Became one of the most successful modern rock acts on streaming platforms. Damn good group. Has a Linkin Park type of feel to it. And other inspirations you could definitely tell. Phil says, quote, I wouldn't refute that rock doesn't work at streaming. It just works in a very different way. If you're comparing it to rap, R&B, and major pop records, where the audiences are exponentially larger, as absolutely they don't perform at the same level. But a great amount of the billions of streams that raw power artists have is from users adding their music into their own playlists. The success for Good For You could see mainstream playlists add more rock acts, but Phil cautions it might not necessarily be a good thing. And this is the mainstream subject you talk about. It's like disco back in the 70s. It's like, take a pick. Sure, if you have certain songs that come into the mainstream, the record labels are going to try to capitalize on that. The radio stations will try to capitalize. So some crap's going to make its way through. But if you're opening the door for that, you're going to have to take the good with the bad. We have to be understanding of that. Will it open up people's ideas about rock music on more mainstream playlists, he ponders? Maybe and maybe not, because those playlists are, by their very nature, fleeting and very transient. And that's what you have to consider. Indeed, Olivia Rodrigo is far from alone in offering hope that rock music is slowly but surely returning to the center of pop culture. Transparent Soul, we talked about. Machine Gun Kelly's For a Reason to Pop Punk, racking up big streaming numbers. A whole raft of emo albums and anthems have found new life on TikTok. And pop stars from Miley Cyrus to Doja Cat are increasingly influenced by rock and metal. With that said, who's not to say that Miley Cyrus or Doja Cat or other artists are going to experiment into rock in forthcoming albums? This is what has to be considered. Because if these artists decide to jump on the bandwagon for a different sound, if Halsey's new album comes out and it performs well, if a Billie Eilish decides to go in that direction for a forthcoming album, same thing as well. There are artists that can definitely pull this off. We don't know what they're going to do yet, but that could definitely be something on the horizon. Down the line, new albums could be looking for this new sound. They might not be going for the 70s, the late 70s, early 80s new wave disco kind of sound anymore. That might have played off. They might still be around, but some people might want to change themselves up. But the artists we have today, there are quite a few of them that are willing to go ahead and experiment. Even some rap artists, I would not be surprised if they decide to go ahead and lean a little bit more into rock. Give that a chance. It could very well happen. We've seen the fusion of that many times before. It could very well happen again. It's just a matter of, will it come up? And this story says it. What I've been saying right now. The focus of my first half hour of this program. What does seem clear is that as the genres blur and audiences become more open-minded, rock acts have a shot at true mainstream success for the first time in a generation. Will it cross over first into the Europe and everywhere else? And then America finally picks it up. It could. It very well could. Now, Phil Birch continues on. Seeing pop artists, quote, reaching back to the rock roots and taking inspiration from there doesn't inspire me. It's part of a series of cross-pollinations from rock to the outside world, and from the outside world into the rock arena. I'm excited to see what such an emo-inspired record such as Good For You could do as a cultural touchstone for fans who might have never heard of Paramore before. How people discover music doesn't really matter, shrugs Haley. None of the entry point Busted and McFly gave the pop punk fans in the 2000s. If people listen to Good For You and then delve into Good Charlotte or Sum 41 or Blink-182's back catalog, that could be a good thing. Everyone's got to start somewhere. So that is considerable. That's good love right there. Could something happen? I'd like to see where they go. I'm very excited about this. And this is why I hope, with a show like mine, I like to jump on the early trends and see what's going on with what's out there. Music we don't talk enough about. But when I see a story like this, I'm like, this is good. This is fun. Maneskin, by the way, they're going to go through a little bit of a bump because now they decided to split from their manager. It's from Music Business Worldwide. They have split with their manager for 4 years, Marta Donna. They're global superstars winning last month's Eurovision Song Contest, Shut Up and Behave, which is translated Ziti Ibwani. And the win became a major coup for the event, the band, and their home nation's music business. So Maneskin's music now is exploding on Spotify. They're signed to Sony Music Italy and going through Sony labels worldwide. They're standing out. They originally were discovered on the Italian X Factor and had already sold out multiple tours across Europe and scored 3 multi-platinum singles in Italy prior to the Eurovision appearance. And actually, Maneskin, if you didn't know, not only have they made British chart history as the first Italian act to score 2 top 10 entries on the official singles chart. In the U.S., they topped the Billboard magazine's hard rock songs chart. Big deal. Maneskin, with 29 million monthly listeners on Spotify, who compare to them, Arctic Monkeys have 19, Tame Impala 14, Foo Fighters 13 million. Even the damn New York Times wrote about Maneskin. What? Even they talked about Maneskin. That's how big a deal this is all is. But of course, there's a paywall, so I can't read this stupid article. Thank you. It's all positive news. I don't know anybody else who wouldn't want this music to come back and make its way in. And I don't know what artists are going to be out there, but what I don't want is I don't want that alternative sound that just feels like it's kind of just like a stretch away from other artists. I want artists to come back, pick up a guitar, grab some drums. Let's start playing with some real instruments again. Let's get some session artists out there to work again. Let's see some real action on stage with some of these acts. Bring it back. Even the style of what people were wearing when it came to rock, that was all cool. Like, people enjoyed it. And, if metal comes back, why can't the kids resonate with music that's loud and angry and boisterous and really speaks to you? That's what it comes down to. We want to see all this music coming back. And I think it would be a wonderful thing to see music really get a jolt in the arm to see that come back. It will be very important for everybody out there. At least where I see things. Now that I've moved along from my main event here, the main topic of the show today, let's get into some of the things I wanted to get into that were very significant that I didn't get a chance to talk to about last week because it all kind of came through now. Royalties for artists. Not only do we want to have new room for artists to, if they want to go and play rock music again and it can become relevant again, then why not? We also want to make sure that artists are able to get compensated. So we talk about stories about Spotify putting up discovery mode or some of the royalties being put out there and how radio needs to also put their point out there too. Well, Congressman last week had proposed the American Music Fairness Act to compel radio to pay royalties on recorded music. And so last Thursday, to address the fact that more than 8,300 AM and FM stations around the country, while they do pay royalties to songwriters, they never have to pay performers or copyright holders, although streaming services do. Which that should be made important. So Representatives Ted Deutsch of Florida, Daryl Issa of California, bipartisan by the way, introduced this bipartisan effort to rectify the situation. According to Congressman Ted Deutsch, he says, quote, "The American Music Fairness Act will protect the artists we know as they make the music we love. For the first time, artists would see a piece of the massive profits made on the backs of their creative work. And Congress must end the unfair deal AM/FM radio has forced the musicians." As you know, myself, I am good about this because I want radio. They need to go and pay their fair share. And if this causes a rift, another cost measure, which is going to affect the likes of the major radio companies that are holding on the stations, another cost that they can't accrue, that they can't write off. If they're all being compelled to pay for royalties, well, then they're going to have to go ahead and probably have to unload stations because they can't afford the cost. If somebody else wants to go and afford the cost and then start paying out royalties properly, being owners of stations, then let's implode these networks, these big companies that are hemorrhaging money, and let's get them to unload these stations. The bill is at least partially in response to the Local Radio Freedom Act, which was introduced last month and championed by the National Association of Broadcasters, aiming to continue terrestrial radio's royalty-free status, saying that Congress should not impose any new performance royalty or other charges that might create economic hardship for locally owned radio stations. Well, what they're not talking about is most of those locally owned radio stations. You're talking about a lot of them that are owned by, major corporations. Some of the real local end. This might be saying this is supposed to be protecting local stations. There are not as many local stations as there are big, large, highly listenable, with large towers, large transmitters, large scape and scale and scope that are going to get penalized if they're able to get this happening. Terrestrial radio is rapidly losing audience to streaming services, satellite radio and podcasts and other broadcasters. And once streaming services become widely available in cars, the decline will even accelerate dramatically. Champions of the Radio Freedom Act are using that threat as an argument for radio to continue to pay no royalties to performers and copyright holders. So, radio, they want to stop the bleeding. They don't want to be hit with this because it was totally change what radio is overall. But I still think if radio was being held by other people and personalities and people that were music savvy and understood the music and understand their audience, and they knew how to go ahead and perform music, kind of give us almost like a free-form radio kind of feel of what the 60s and 70s used to be. If we brought that back and we got that here, it would be an important change for everybody out there. So the Fairness Act, the NAB spoke out about it. Gordon Smith, the president and CEO, said, for decades, broadcast radios enjoyed a mutually beneficial relationship with the music industry, launching and sustaining the careers of countless artists, promoting album sales and streams, and helping to foster a robust music creation environment that is the envy of the world. Bullshit. If that's the case, Gordon, then why did I not talk about, maybe about 3-4 months ago, how all these record labels are dropping radio promotion? They're focusing on streaming. If there was this wonderful relationship, it's only for a select few artists that get to have that relationship with radio. So you want to talk about Ariana Grande or Taylor Swift or Ed Sheeran or Bruno Mars or what have you. Yeah. Justin Bieber. Yeah. They're the ones that have the relationship, a robust music creation environment. But everybody else doesn't. So that statement doesn't hold water for me. And that should be understood for others. Keep that in mind. A few other stories I want to get into. Now let's go move along to other things. So there's one other congressional battle about lobbying of radio royalties. And when I'll bring that up, it was a follow-up story to this particular act that came out. Music First, a coalition of music creators and record labels, are lobbying the lawmakers to support the bill. Now, some more information and some background on this. Under a century-old law, radio stations must pay songwriters to play their music, but are not required to pay artists. And the radio stations have long argued that radio is a promotional tool for artists to get their music out to new listeners for free, and artists often ask radio stations to play their songs. Now, Music First is arguing that the legislation would protect local radio. Stations with revenue under $100,000 per year would pay just $10 annually to play music. That's it. Non-commercial stations of all sizes would pay $100 per year. See? See? The whole talking about local radio freedom act and this act, it's all kind of convoluted because there's exactly what you hear. It's the part that nobody's talking about. The quiet part. $10 to play music annually. If you're making less than $100 an hour a year. So you're not going to get barraged with a big fee for royalties. You're going to pay what you can. The largest radio companies such as iHeartMedia, Cumulus Media, and Town Square Media, which own hundreds of radio stations across the country, the advocates note that radio stations in foreign countries also play American music without paying royalties, potentially depriving artists of up to $200 million annually. And lobbying is a big deal with all this. The NAB spent nearly $2 million in lobbying the first 3 months of the year. The Recording Industry Association of America, which represents record labels and a member of Music First, spent around $1.2 million. So the fight between both of these acts and which one will pass, obviously the mainstream, the establishment, the National Association of Broadcasters, representing the radio stations, they want this Local Radio Freedom Act, and that's why they're spending more money, outspending on lobbying efforts than Music First or the RIAA and the music industry. It's all interesting information. And this is what's got to be considered. Now, let's go ahead and talk about corporate radio and what they're doing, which they're doing something I've actually talked about for a while now, that it sounds like it's starting to be done because they don't have the amount of talent to satisfy all the radio stations. So there are plans now for CHR at Audacy and iHeartMedia. iHeartMedia, or Audacy used to be Entercom or CBS or Infinity, all those stations that were out there beforehand. So now major initiatives are being made to lead the changes around many CHR stations around the country. So now Audacy, they're initiating a reorganization of programming at its alternative country stations last September, changing national midday and evening shows at their country outlets, adding national midday and evening shows at their country outlets. The alternative stations went to jocks mostly being heard on 3 or 4 stations, plus national evening and overnight shows. And both had new weekend specialty shows created and moved to smaller programming teams overseeing each format. Audacy's now doing the same thing for some of their other formats. Top 40 or Contemporary Hit Radio will be one of them. Based on last week's cuts at WPGC in Washington, D.C., that hip-hop stations will also see some form of restructuring. So what's being told to the folks at RadioInsight.com, they're reporting that we will see the launch of national midday and evening shows that will air on all or most of the company's 16 stations in the format. The new on-air lineups are set to debut immediately after the July 4th holiday weekend. Much like the rollout alternative last year, where multiple stations dropped their prior identities for alt, we're hearing a possibility of some of the CHR standardizing under the Now brand, which was launched at 97.1 in Los Angeles in April. iHeartMedia is on the hunt for additional talent. They're reporting that Bob Pittman and Rich Bressler at iHeartMedia are where the company has cut too deep over the past couple of years, and they will be refiling some of their lost positions, and the focus right now is restaffing promotions departments. The company was told by multiple people they're putting a focus on developing more CHR morning shows. The development is coming in multiple forms. Z100 debuted a new afternoon show hosted by evening host Maxwell and former Wild 94.9 San Francisco host Crystal Rosas at the start of the month. And another 2-person afternoon show is in the pipeline, being set up for 2 stations. And one of those will be at Q102 in Philadelphia. WQEN, 103.7 The Q, lost their syndicated Ace and TJ show to a crosstown competitor and went local in the mornings. And there are other shows that are going to be doing the same kind of idea. So with the initiative being coming from the company's primary CHR morning talent being on the wrong side of 50, and in part knowing the talent pool has been depleted in recent years by all the cutbacks across the industry, New shows that have been being put together by iHeartRadio to help refresh all these morning shows include The Joe Show over at WFLZ in Tampa, 93.3 FLZ, and the hiring of Jubal Fresh to lead mornings at KBKS in Seattle, and a few others via syndication, is sort of the next generation of CHR morning talent at iHeartMedia. But what Audacy is doing right now is trying to nationalize their programming, which is where you're going to get to do if you're going to be corporate. You might as well go the route of what UK and everybody else does. You know, when you talk about Energy or Capital or KISS or all these other formats that are going on in other markets in other countries, the same thing's going to have to happen here eventually. And that is until, hopefully, something that happens like the one of the acts out there that we talked about will come into play, and then it will ultimately change the American Music Fairness Act, which I will just go ahead and say I endorse that act, and I hope that passes, just to say. So we've talked about music extensively, talked a little bit about radio just now. A few other stories when it comes to TV and movies I want to go and bring up here real quick. The TV news having an existential crisis. This is from the NAB, National Association of Broadcasters. We're talking about the fact that there's a crisis brewing for TV news because of the consumers cutting the cord for streaming services. There was an op-ed for CNBC that talked about the quandary for the TV news business. And Tom Rogers, the first president of NBC Cable, talked about this, quote, "While the streaming wars heat up and legacy television channels lose both viewing audience and subscribers, no one's really focused on what this means for TV news. And that's because the business model has been underpinned national and local TV news for decades. It's under serious threat." So cable, they're paid very substantial fees to carry programming like CNBC, CNN, CNBC, MSNBC, and Fox News. And subscriber fees are paid to news channels covering over 75 million households, even though a small minority of households watch each of those channels. Up to 3 million at the time, or maybe 6 or 10 as there's breaking news. Local TV stations are paid retransmission fees from cable and satellite operators, which are on the verge of plateauing and possibly declining. TV news began as public service programming that broadcasters had to carry as a condition of their license from the FCC, but it will soon face an existential crisis as to how to remain so. And one thing that could happen could be a bundle of national and local TV news, similar to Apple's package of magazines and newspapers offered digitally with Apple News Plus. But so far, it's been underwhelming in terms of adoption. And that NBC Universal and Comcast could put something like this together because of their broad array of news assets. Or somebody comes out as a neutral distributor. So getting into the streaming area and try to put something together that will work. Now, Fox has Fox Nation, a subscription news model for the right or right wing, but Rogers guessed the model is insufficient to make up for the substantial financial decline the Fox News channel will suffer with significant diminished cable satellite subscriber fee support. And local news in general, more than 70 local newsrooms have closed over the past 15 months, with hundreds of media jobs lost, and the difficult financial conditions in the industry intensified during the crisis. But estimates 2,100 local newspapers, or 1 in 4, have closed in the U.S. since 2005. And now, much like radio, The Guardian reports that hedge funds or private equity firms are now controlling half of U.S. daily newspapers, including some of the largest newspaper groups in the country. Yep. And when you have those vultures coming into play, just like radio, the newspapers and these publications are only assets. They're not looking to grow them. They're looking to benefit from them. That is it. And that's where things go. I want to get things ended up on a happy note here on the program, because this is a telling sign, and it makes me happy. Very content that right now the movies are back. And the movies, the box offices are starting, hey, regardless of what you say, what happened with AMC and the meme stocks and all the stuff that were going on with them and what they were able to do to kind of help themselves get afloat, because AMC is in much better shape than they were before. Well, the movie studios, once they came back, they're making money once again. Patience was a virtue for studios that held films. from Pamela McClintock over at Hollywood Reporter. Let me just pull up the latest box office numbers. Because I was sick, I didn't get to watch F9, but I'm going to get to watch that now. Let's look at the weekend chart and the kind of money right now that's coming in. F9 first week grossed $70 million. Yeah, baby. No signs of stopping. If they're able to do that, international box office, $335 million, and they've been open for a couple weeks now. Over $400 million. This movie's going to make $1 billion. Pretty sure of that. Then you're looking at the rest of the charts. Quiet Place, $136 million gross in the USA. Second week in the box office. $25 million for Hitman's Wife's Bodyguard. Peter Rabbit 2, $28 million. Cruella, $71 million. The Conjuring, $59 million. Like, that's some big bucks. Big bucks. So the box office battery has been recharged, and now there's a collective sense of confidence for Hollywood's bruised film studios as they once again prepare to release a steady supply of tentpoles. Now, there's a growing sense that the remaining 2021 schedule is relatively safe. Paramount's A Quiet Place Part 2 was a major boost to the box office recovery since its Memorial Day debut. And it has made globally $250 million against the $55 million budget. Warner Brothers and Legendary's March event with Godzilla vs. Kong made $442 million globally, including $102 million domestically. And that had more challenges than F9 because of capacity restrictions that had been lifted in most markets. And then they also had the simultaneous push out to HBO Max. Mask policies have been relaxed, particularly for fully vaccinated. And 80% of North American cinemas are now reopened. A good sign for movies like No Time to Die and West Side Story to be coming out in October and December, respectively. Other studios are taking a different route, making films available in the home and on the big screen simultaneously, which the Warners embraced for its 2021 slate. You have Dune on October 22nd. Disney doing the same thing. They'll have an availability for their Black Widow movie from Marvel on July 9th. MKM Partners analyst Eric Handler forecasts the domestic box office will be 90% of normal in the fourth quarter. Other tentpoles coming up to help boost the box office. You got Jungle Cruise from Disney Pictures July 30th. Suicide Squad from Warner Brothers August 6th. They'll be open day and date and at home and on the big screen, simultaneous, on demand and in the theaters. Then Disney and Marvel's Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, September 3rd, an exclusive theatrical release. The Eternals on November 5th. Top Gun Maverick will release on November 19th, right in time for Thanksgiving. And then towards Christmas time, you got Spider-Man's No Way Home and Warner's The Matrix 4. So movies are back. When I look at the movies that are coming out, the release schedule coming up, it's not a major push out of new movies each and every week. There are some wide releases coming out now pretty consistently as we speak. So The Boss Baby, Forever Purge, and Summer of Soul are all wide releasing this weekend for July 4th. You got Black Widow that comes out July 9th. Escape Room Space Jam for July 16th. The Comeback Trail Old Snake Eyes for July 23rd. The Green Knight, Jungle Cruise, and Stillwater. So you're getting multiple movies now, 2 to 3 each week coming out. So you're going to have a good amount of movies that are coming out pretty regularly that are all coming back. Now, some movies might not get as big as well as the others, but widescreen releases are coming out pretty consistently, which is great. And that's good to go and see all that coming back out. By the way, Many Saints of Newark is coming out this October. Check out the trailer for that. It looks fantastic. I'm looking forward to that, among other things. And it's nice because now I can start going back to the movies. I got my subscription at Regal. The movie theaters are back open again. It's like it used to be. So I'm really happy about all that. And some movies that are not being talked about coming up as well. Ghostbusters Afterlife is now slated for November 11th. Elvis on November 5th. So we got movies coming out that people might not be talking about too much. Gucci, November 24th. Resident Evil, another one, November 24th. Yeah, there's quite a bit. And then Downton Abbey 2 on December 22nd. The King's Man December 22nd. Sing 2, December 22nd. So Christmas, you're going to be loaded with movies. And there might be some other movies that might get added to the mix. And then 2022, as I've said before, we're going to get loaded with movies. Like I'm looking right now, and you can see there might be 3 to 4 new movies each and every week next year to pick up from where we left off. That's going to be fun. All right, that's our show for tonight. I really appreciate all of you checking in and checking out the shows you always do. And I hope that you'll decide to go ahead and interact and continue to tell more people about the show and let them listen in as we continue to talk about all things when it comes to media here on the Broadcasters Podcast. Remember, until next week, content is king, and the control of your content is in your hands.
Thank you for listening to the Broadcasters Podcast. Find all the links to subscribe to the show by going to broadcasterspodcast.com. And don't forget to check out the King of Podcasts wrestling program, the Wrestling is Real podcast, exclusively at wrestlingisreal.com.